The morning sun poured gently into the cozy suburban home of Sarah and Tom Andrews. The kitchen smelled faintly of fresh coffee and pancakes, though the small stack on the plate remained largely untouched. 3-year-old Lily sat on the rug, legs tucked beneath her, building a tower of pastel-colored blocks. Each block was meticulously stacked, her tiny hands steady for someone so small, and her tongue poked out slightly as she concentrated. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with its usual quiet energy. Birds chirping from the oak trees, leaves rustling with the occasional gust of wind. But there was an undercurrent in the air that didn't belong to ordinary mornings. Police cars glinted from the street, their sleek black paint reflecting sunlight, and officers moved with purpose, their radios crackling softly as they coordinated. A K-9 unit was stationed near the edge of the Andrews property, the dog alert, sniffing, and shifting its weight from paw to paw, clearly trained for tasks that required a sharper eye than most adults could muster. Lily's attention, curious and innocent, flicked toward the dog repeatedly, though she said nothing. Sarah wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, glancing out the window, her heart tightening. "Tom, they're already here. Right outside our yard," she whispered, almost to herself. Her husband, standing by the fridge, frowned, his hand lingering on the handle of a mug filled with lukewarm coffee. He followed her gaze. "It's quietly tense," he said, more to convince himself than her. "I just hope they don't disturb Lily." Lily, meanwhile, remained engrossed in her little world, occasionally glancing up to mimic her parents' expressions. Her parents exchanged worried glances again. The town had been shaken recently. A burglary in the neighborhood had everyone on edge. Jewelry stolen from homes. Valuables gone without a trace. Mr. Jenkins, a soft-spoken man living a few houses down, had been arrested. The police were thorough, but evidence remained circumstantial. Friends whispered behind closed doors. Neighbors exchanged theories. And the Andrews family felt caught in the middle of community tension. "Do you think he's really guilty?" Sarah asked quietly, almost as if voicing the question aloud might make it real. Tom shook his head, running a hand over his stubble. "I don't know. I mean, evidence isn't clear. But the police? They seemed certain." Unaware of the layers of adult doubt, Lily's tiny mind processed the scene differently. She watched the dog, following its movements with wide, unblinking eyes. She noticed how it sniffed the garden fence, circled the flower beds, and occasionally glanced toward the Andrews porch as if waiting for a signal. To Lily, this wasn't frightening. It was a game, a puzzle she wanted to solve. She pointed subtly with her finger and muttered a few words she'd overheard, copying what she had heard adults say. "Find it. Go." Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, but precise. Sarah noticed and smiled faintly, kneeling beside her daughter. "What is it, baby?" she asked. Lily's small hand rested on the edge of the tower she had built, eyes locked on the dog. "Dog. Go there," Lily said, tilting her head as if explaining a rule of a game no one else could see. Sarah exchanged a glance with Tom, a mixture of amusement and slight concern. She knew Lily's mind was sharp, but the weight of the morning made her more aware of how small her daughter seemed amidst the tension. The minutes passed slowly. Officers whispered into radios, occasionally glancing toward the house. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some whispering prayers under their breath. The Andrews family's quiet morning had become a silent stage for something larger, something none of them could yet fully predict. Tom took a deep breath. "We need to keep her calm. She shouldn't be scared." Lily, however, wasn't scared. She was watching, absorbing. Even the slight glint of sunlight off the dog's collar seemed to catch her attention. She noticed how the dog's ears perked whenever a command was given. She noticed how the officer's hand gestured subtly, directing its focus. These were details adults overlooked, lost in the swirl of assumption and anxiety. But to Lily, it was obvious. The dog knew more than anyone realized, and she, in her own small way, was watching it carefully. Inside the kitchen, Sarah tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She poured herself a coffee refill, feeling the warmth in her hands, grounding herself. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just police routine, she muttered. Tom nodded, though his eyes stayed glued to the window. His heart thrummed with unease, but he tried to mask it with quiet rationalizations. They were careful parents, protective, but this situation tested even the best prepared. Outside, the dog moved closer to the fence, sniffing methodically. Lily's gaze followed, intent and unwavering. There, she exclaimed softly, pointing, though no one else had noticed the detail she had picked up. Her parents glanced at her, puzzled. Lily, what is it, baby? Sarah asked, crouching to be at her daughter's eye level. Lily's tiny voice answered, Not him. Not him. Sarah froze, her heart skipping. Tom turned sharply. What did you say? He asked, his voice tight. Lily repeated, confidently pointing toward the dog. Not him. The adults outside, busy with police protocol, didn't yet realize the significance of Lily's observation. But for the Andrews family, a chill ran down their spines. A 3-year-old had just noticed something that no grown-up had thought important. Her innocence, her clarity, and her honesty shone through the tension of the morning. Sarah hugged her daughter, whispering, You're very smart, Lily. She didn't know yet just how right she was. Tom, still watching the scene unfold, felt a mix of awe and disbelief. A quiet, ordinary morning had transformed into something extraordinary. The puzzle pieces of the neighborhood theft were still scattered, but one small voice, barely audible, had already begun shifting the course of what was to come. And so, in that sunlit kitchen, with the smell of pancakes lingering in the air and the police dog pacing outside, a story quietly began, one that would ripple through the courtroom, through the town, and through the lives of everyone involved. Lily, blissfully unaware of her power to change the outcome of justice, simply played with her blocks, watching, pointing, and observing. A tiny witness in a world full of grown-up assumptions, ready to speak the truth when the moment arrived. The events leading up to the courtroom drama had begun quietly, almost imperceptibly, the way some storms gather in the distance. It was a Tuesday evening, and the sun had dipped behind the rooftops, leaving the neighborhood in soft golden shadows. Lily's parents, Sarah and Tom, were preparing dinner, while Lily toddled around the living room, humming a tune only she knew. Across the street, Mr. Jenkins' house, neat and unassuming, held an energy the neighbors had not noticed until that day. A burglary had occurred the night before. Jewelry, cash, and some electronics gone without a trace. The police had arrived promptly, flashing lights cutting through the dim glow of street lamps. Officers took statements from neighbors, photographing backyards, checking fences, and noting unusual tire tracks and driveways. Mr. Jenkins, a quiet man in his mid-40s, had been cooperative, yet his calm demeanor had somehow raised suspicion. His explanation seemed reasonable. He had been visiting a sick relative that evening, but the timing was murky, the alibi lacking witnesses. Neighbors whispered behind curtains, some eyes narrowing in judgment, others showing hesitation. Inside the Andrews home, Sarah and Tom watched nervously as the police dogs methodically searched the streets. Lily, too small to fully understand the gravity of the situation, followed the movements with uncanny attention. She noticed how the canine's nose twitched at the scent of soil near the fence, how it paused before a flower bed and then circled back. "Doggy, go there," she said. pointing at a spot the adults overlooked. Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance. They had begun noticing something extraordinary about their daughter's awareness, something sharper than her years should allow. By evening, Mr. Jenkins had been arrested. The local police, diligent but human, had relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, his proximity to the crime scene, some inconsistencies in statements, and the nervous demeanor they interpreted as guilt. Officers filled out paperwork, neighbors gossiped, and whispers spread. Was it really him? Could he have done it? The Andrews family tried to keep Lily occupied, giving her coloring books and snacks, while the adults wrestled with doubt and fear. Lily, meanwhile, processed details in a way adults did not. She remembered seeing a shadow near the bushes the previous evening, a man hurrying away from a neighbor's driveway. But her memory wasn't clouded with assumptions, fear, or bias. To her, it was simply what she saw, a figure moving quickly and then gone. She remembered the sound of wheels on gravel and the flicker of the streetlight against a coat that shimmered silver in the moonlight. Tiny observations that would later matter, but in the moment, she was simply repeating them to herself, replaying a puzzle only her mind could assemble. Tom tried to reassure Sarah. Maybe they just need more evidence, he said, his voice steady, but eyes betraying worry. But it feels unfair, holding him until it's proven. Sarah nodded, her hands fidgeting with a tea towel. I know, but Lily, she saw things differently. She notices details no one else does. Tom looked down at their daughter, who had stacked blocks carefully, the tower wobbling slightly as she adjusted a piece. If only adults could see the world like her, he murmured. Across town, Mr. Jenkins sat in the holding cell, staring at the gray walls. His mind was a storm of anxiety, disbelief, and frustration. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, yet he felt the weight of assumption pressing down on him. The officers were thorough, professional, but even they admitted the evidence was mostly circumstantial. And in his heart, he hoped someone would notice, some voice of reason, that the truth was not what it seemed. Back at the Andrews home, Lily's mind replayed events. The sound of the dog's paws on gravel, the flash of light on the street, the smell of the grass, all were details that no one else had noticed. She repeated them quietly to herself, her tiny voice mimicking phrases she had overheard from adults. Not him, she whispered several times, pointing toward the K-9 officer outside, though her parents didn't yet understand why she repeated it. As evening deepened, the local news picked up the story. Neighbors shared pictures of the stolen property, theories bloomed in online forums, and the town collectively held its breath. The Andrews family stayed home, trying to shield Lily from fear, but also aware that she had witnessed things adults had overlooked. Sarah pondered aloud. Do you think she... Remember when it counts? Tom nodded. She will. She always does. By nightfall, Lily had gone to bed, but her mind was still active. Images of the previous evening floated in her dreams, a shadow moving swiftly, the glint of the silver coat, the dog sniffing in the right direction. Her small fingers twitched in sleep, as though rehearsing the pointing gesture she would make later, unaware that it would change the course of a man's life. The next morning, the courthouse was buzzing. Mr. Jenkins awaited his day in court. Officers and lawyers prepared their notes, and Sarah and Tom held Lily close as they stepped into the grand building. Lily's observations, seemingly insignificant to most, were quietly waiting for the moment when truth would align with innocence. For the adults, the focus was on documents, testimony, and procedure. But for Lily, the pieces of the puzzle were already visible. Her sharp eyes, unclouded by bias, had already noticed patterns that would escape the most trained adults. And in that small, bustling courthouse, with sunlight streaming through tall windows and the scent of polished wood in the air, A 3-year-old prepared unknowingly to point out the truth, a truth that no one had yet considered. In those moments, the story of the incident wasn't just about theft, evidence, or suspicion. It was about perception, innocence, and the fragile way that justice depended not only on adults' skills, but on the honesty of small, unnoticed witnesses. And Lily, blissfully unaware of her crucial role, would soon speak the 2 words that would ripple across the courtroom, the town, and the life of Mr. Jenkins forever. The Andrews family, holding each other's hands, felt a quiet tension. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, filled with strangers, authority, and expectation. Outside, the K-9 unit rested, waiting. And inside, a little girl's mind quietly traced events, ready to reveal what adults had missed. The theft had occurred, but so had something else. A child's perception, patient and precise, waiting for the moment to shine. And thus, the stage was set. The incident, seemingly ordinary in its timing and sequence, had sparked a chain of events that no one, not officers, not lawyers, not neighbors, could fully anticipate. Lily, small and unassuming, had already seen what mattered most. The truth, in its purest form, was waiting for her tiny voice to bring it into the open. The courthouse loomed tall and solemn in the early morning light, its limestone facade casting long shadows over the steps. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood, aged paper, and anticipation. Sarah and Tom Andrews held Lily's tiny hand as they climbed the stairs, their hearts heavy with worry. Today was the day that could decide Mr. Jenkins' fate, and their little girl, only 3, had already noticed things no adult had paid attention to. She toddled between her parents, her eyes wide, curious, observing the flurry of activity around her. Lawyers huddled over files, flipping pages and whispering strategy. Court officers moved with precise, deliberate steps, their polished shoes echoing in the cavernous hall. Journalists jostled for positions, cameras clicking softly, recording faces and notes for the evening news. The room hummed with tension, punctuated by the low murmur of conversations and the occasional squeak of chair legs. For adults, the day was about evidence, procedure, and persuasion. But for Lily, it was an entirely different theater. She noticed the details that would escape the trained eyes of professionals, the nervous twitch of a lawyer's hand, the subtle shift of a witness's gaze, the careful posture of the K-9 officer guiding the dog. The K-9 unit entered first, the dog alert and disciplined, eyes scanning the room, tail swishing in controlled anticipation. Its handler whispered commands softly, the dog responding instantly, demonstrating a bond born of rigorous training. Lily's gaze followed every movement, her small head tilting slightly as she observed. Her parents whispered for her to stay calm, but they were increasingly aware that she was absorbing every nuance of the environment. Tom leaned down and adjusted Lily's small sweater. "Remember, honey, we're just here to watch today. Everything else is for the adults." Lily nodded solemnly, though her attention remained glued to the dog, her tiny fingers gripping her mother's hand lightly but firmly. Sarah swallowed hard, wondering if they had made the right decision bringing her. But deep down, she knew Lily had already seen too much to be ignored. Her sharp observation could be the key to clarity in a case muddied by suspicion. The judge entered, robes flowing, exuding authority and calm. Everyone stood briefly before sitting as the courtroom settled. Mr. Jenkins sat nervously at the defense table, hands clasped tightly, jaw tense. He stole a glance at Lily, sensing her quiet presence. It was unusual to have a child in such a formal setting, and yet there was something striking about her focus. The way she quietly took in the environment without fear or hesitation. The prosecution began reviewing evidence first. Photographs, statements, and timelines were presented in rapid succession. Witnesses were called to the stand, their voices shaking slightly as they recounted the night of the burglary. Each detail was scrutinized, cross-examined, and debated. Adults leaned forward, whispering, frowning, shaking heads. Every eye was on the technicalities. Every eye, that is, except Lily's. She was following the story differently. She remembered exactly where the shadow had appeared in the neighbors' yard, the glint of the silver coat, the subtle sound of footsteps on gravel. She repeated phrases softly under her breath, mimicking adult voices. Not him, not him. Her words were barely audible or precise, carrying an instinctive weight that only a child could muster. As the court prepared for the K-9 demonstration, Lily's parents felt a sudden tension in the room. The dog would indicate where evidence or a scent trail had been detected. Officers whispered to each other, reminding themselves of procedure while the judge watched intently. Lily pointed again at the dog, murmuring softly, "No, not him." Sarah's stomach tightened. Tom leaned over, whispering, "She's noticed something. Pay attention." The officer positioned the dog near a small area of the courtroom floor designated for demonstration. The dog sniffed meticulously, following the scent trail indicated by the police logs. Every adult waited, watching for a response that would confirm or contradict the evidence. Lily's finger extended, pointing at a spot the dog seemed uninterested in, yet she remained insistent. "Not him," she whispered again, her tiny voice barely rising above the murmurs of the courtroom. Her parents exchanged nervous glances. Could a 3-year-old really have the clarity to notice what the dog, trained for months, might miss? Witnesses were called to the stand again. Their testimonies revealed small inconsistencies in timing and observation. Adults debated interpretations, some dismissing the subtle contradictions as minor errors. But Lily, seated quietly, noticed each discrepancy. She recalled precisely which shadow appeared, which way the suspect had moved, and where the dog had paused. Her memory, unclouded by bias or assumption, captured the sequence with uncanny clarity. Sarah glanced at her daughter, astonished at the focus and intensity in those wide, innocent eyes. Lawyers debated the interpretation of the K-9 report. Officers defended the procedure, confident yet increasingly aware that the child's observation could not be ignored. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched her daughter adjust her position, pointing deliberately again. Lily had already chosen her words carefully. The room's attention began to shift. Judges leaned forward, reporters scribbled quickly, and Mr. Jenkins' tense shoulders seemed to relax ever so slightly. In that quiet tension, the narrative of the case began to change. Evidence that once seemed decisive now appeared ambiguous. Timelines required clarification. Witnesses needed to explain gaps. And in the middle of all this, Lily remained a tiny observer, her perception sharpening the focus of the adults around her. The innocence and honesty of a child were suddenly proving more insightful than months of formal investigation. Sarah whispered to Tom, "Do you see? She remembers everything." Tom nodded, eyes fixed on Lily. "She's amazing." But he knew the weight of the moment. A 3-year-old's words might influence the court, yet adults would still struggle to reconcile the simplicity of her observation with the complexity of legal procedure. As the courtroom prepared to continue, officers subtly shifted the dog's position for the next demonstration. Lily's tiny hand rose again, pointing with quiet insistence. "Not him," she said clearly, this time loud enough for the judge to notice. A hush fell over the room. Adults paused, lawyers froze mid-gesture, and reporters exchanged glances. The judge raised an eyebrow, eyes narrowing, noting the unusual authority in the child's tone. Even Mr. Jenkins glanced at Lily, sensing that her perception could alter the narrative. The day stretched forward, but the stage had already been set. Evidence would be examined with fresh eyes. Witnesses cross-checked against details a toddler had noticed. Adults realized, perhaps reluctantly, that clarity sometimes came from those who saw the world unfiltered, unburdened by assumptions or fear. Lily, unaware of the weight of her observations, simply adjusted her seat, looked at the dog, and repeated softly, "Not him." Her voice carried innocence, precision, and undeniable truth. The morning ended with murmurs of anticipation. Officers, lawyers, and the judge knew that something unusual was unfolding. A case once dominated by circumstantial evidence and doubt was shifting subtly, almost imperceptibly, thanks to the quiet observations of a 3-year-old. Outside, sunlight continued to stream through the high windows of the courthouse, glinting off the polished floors and the canine's collar. Lily, small and unassuming, had become the unexpected lens through which truth would soon emerge. As the Andrews family left the courtroom for a brief recess, Sarah held Lily tightly. "You've been very brave today," she whispered. Tom added, "And very smart. Don't forget, honey, you notice things most grown-ups can't." Lily looked up at them with wide eyes, a soft giggle escaping her lips, unaware of the storm of attention, preparation, and consequence swirling around her. The court would reconvene. Soon, and when it did, the smallest voice in the room would be heard, perhaps altering the course of justice in ways no one could yet predict. The courtroom was tense, heavy with expectation. Sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, casting sharp lines across polished wood and marble floors. The air smelled faintly of paper, polished shoes, and quiet apprehension. Sarah and Tom sat on the front bench, Lily nestled between them, her tiny fingers gripping her mother's hand. Reporters whispered softly, cameras angled for every detail, while officers and lawyers prepared their notes. Mr. Jenkins sat at the defense table, hands clenched, jaw tight, his eyes flicking occasionally toward the canine officer and the dog that had already become a silent witness in this case. The judge entered, robes flowing, exuding calm authority, and everyone stood briefly before sitting as the court settled into solemn order. The prosecution began presenting its case, each argument precise, measured, and rehearsed. Lawyers highlighted circumstantial evidence, Mr. Jenkins' proximity to the crime scene, minor inconsistencies in his alibi, and witness statements that seemed to imply guilt. Voices echoed in the courtroom, bouncing off high ceilings, each word carrying weight, influence, and expectation. Lily, small and seemingly insignificant in her seat, absorbed every detail, while adults debated timelines and motive. She noticed subtleties no one else did, the slight pause of a witness before answering, the flicker of movement in a shadowed corner, a dog's focused gaze on a particular area of the floor, her small head tilted, eyes wide, following every motion, every expression. To Lily, the scene was a puzzle, the pieces subtle and precise, waiting to be arranged into clarity. The prosecution called a witness from the night of the burglary. Their voice trembled slightly, recalling the sounds of footsteps and the glint of silver as someone hurried past a neighbor's fence. The lawyer's questions were precise, calculated, seeking to pin Mr. Jenkins as the man seen in the shadows. But as the witness recounted their memory, Lily's fingers twitched. She repeated softly to herself, "Not him. Not him," pointing quietly toward the canine, eyes tracking the dog's movements and the officer's positioning. Her voice was barely audible, yet it carried an instinctive conviction. The canine demonstration began. Officers instructed the dog to follow scent trails related to the burglary. The dog moved with disciplined focus, sniffing carefully, tail high, eyes sharp. Adults leaned forward, whispering predictions, comparing the dog's behavior to the documented timeline. Lily, tiny and still, extended her finger. She pointed toward a spot the dog ignored, murmuring, "Not him." Sarah leaned over and whispered, "Lily, sweetie, be quiet." But even as she tried to hush her daughter, The words held weight, signaling an observation adults had yet to fully grasp. Mr. Jenkins' attorney watched closely, noticing the child's intent focus. He whispered to a colleague, "Look at that girl. She's paying more attention than half these witnesses." The prosecutor, unaware of Lily's repeated observation, continued her questioning, confident in the strength of the circumstantial evidence. But subtle cracks were forming. Each detail adults assumed to be decisive now seemed less clear. Witness statements contained inconsistencies, timelines conflicted, and the dog's behavior, once considered absolute, now required closer examination. Lily's quiet insistence grew. She rocked slightly in her seat, pointing firmly at the dog, her voice rising just enough to be audible. "Not him." The courtroom froze. Eyes turned toward the 3-year-old, some incredulous, others curious. Even the judge tilted his head, eyebrows raised, sensing the clarity in her tone. Reporters whispered frantically, journalists scribbled notes, and officers exchanged puzzled glances. Mr. Jenkins looked at her, a spark of hope flickering in his otherwise tense eyes. Could a child truly perceive what trained adults had overlooked? The room was silent, except for Lily's small voice repeating her assertion. The judge leaned forward slightly, signaling a pause. Lawyers, officers, and witnesses turned their attention to the toddler. Sarah held her daughter, her heart pounding, whispering softly, "It's okay, baby. Just tell the truth." Tom nodded beside her, equally tense, recognizing that this moment could alter the entire trial. A courtroom seemed to hold its breath, suspended between skepticism and wonder. The prosecutor, momentarily thrown, glanced at the officers. "Your Honor, she's just a child," she said carefully. "I don't see how this affects the case." The judge's gaze, however, remained on Lily. "Bring her forward," he said softly. "We will hear what she has observed." A murmur ran through the room. Adults shifted in their seats, realizing that the smallest witness might provide the insight they had all missed. Lily was guided toward the center of the courtroom. Her tiny feet barely made a sound on the polished floor. She approached the K-9 officer and the dog, pointing decisively. "Not him," she said clearly, eyes wide and unwavering. The courtroom went silent. Even the dog seemed to pause, as if sensing the significance of her words. The officers exchanged glances, suddenly aware that this innocent child had noticed something critical, something adults had overlooked. The judge, leaning forward on the bench, asked gently, "Lily, can you tell us what you mean?" Lily pointed again, her small finger steady. "The dog. He's not the one," she said, her voice ringing with clarity. "It's not him." Her words were simple, unadorned, but their weight was undeniable. Adults had debated evidence, scrutinized timelines, and interpreted behaviors. Yet this tiny child had cut through it all with unfiltered observation. Mr. Jenkins' lips quivered slightly as hope surged in his chest. The defense attorney stepped closer, voice calm but urgent. "Your Honor, may we request a reassessment of the K-9 evidence based on the child's observation?" The judge nodded. "Yes, let's proceed carefully. All testimony and evidence will be reviewed in light of this new perspective." The courtroom buzzed with renewed tension, curiosity, and disbelief. A 3-year-old's simple words had shifted the energy, and now adults would have to follow her lead. The officers guided the dog through the demonstration again, this time with closer attention to Lily's pointed observation. The dog's movements, previously unquestioned, now revealed subtle nuances, sniffing at incorrect locations, missing faint scents, and finally pausing where Lily had indicated. Her insight proved precise. The dog had not reacted to the actual path of the intruder, a detail no adult had caught. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. For the first time, grown-ups realized the potential accuracy of a child's unfiltered perception. Witnesses were recalled to the stand, questioned anew, timelines re-examined. Evidence previously taken as conclusive now appeared ambiguous. Every detail was reconsidered through the lens of Lily's observation. Adults found themselves astonished by the clarity of a mind so young, untainted by bias or fear. Even seasoned officers admitted a quiet humility, recognizing that months of training had not revealed what a 3-year-old could perceive in minutes. Lily returned to her parents' side, still unaware of the magnitude of her contribution. She played with a small piece of paper, adjusting it like a puzzle, as if she had simply finished a game. Sarah and Tom held her hands, hearts full of awe, gratitude, and anxiety. "She's amazing," Sarah whispered. "She truly is," Tom agreed. The courtroom, meanwhile, was shifting, evolving. Adult confidence had given way to caution, curiosity, and a new sense of possibility. By the end of the morning session, the case had transformed. The prosecution, once confident, now faced uncertainty. The defense gained momentum, buoyed by the unexpected clarity of a toddler's insight. Mr. Jenkins' expression softened. Hope replaced some of the tension in his posture. Adults, though cautious, recognized that Lily's words carried truth, and that the next stages of the trial would need to reflect this revelation. Outside the courthouse, sunlight illuminated the steps and polished facade, symbolically echoing the illumination Lily had brought to the case. A small child, unaware of her significance, had already reshaped the narrative, proving that honesty and perception are sometimes more powerful than training, experience, or assumption. In the quiet moments, Sarah held Lily close, whispering, "You're very brave, baby." Tom nodded, voice tight with emotion, and very, very smart. Lily simply giggled, adjusting a small curl behind her ear, oblivious to the extraordinary impact of her observations. A 3-year-old had, in the span of a morning, challenged assumptions, altered perspectives, and begun to shift the course of justice. And the courtroom would never be the same. The courtroom had settled into an unusual hush, the kind that comes when everyone senses that a shift is underway. Lily's simple, clear words, "Not him," echoed softly in the minds of lawyers, officers, and the judge. Adults who had once relied on months of investigation now reconsidered the weight of a child's observation. The prosecution paused, reviewing notes, their confidence shaken. Even seasoned detectives exchanged glances, realizing that a tiny, unfiltered perspective had exposed details overlooked by the most meticulous investigators. The K-9 officer adjusted his stance, the dog resting attentively at his side. They had run the demonstration again, this time taking the toddler's observation into account. The dog's behavior was revealing. Subtle hesitations, minor false positives, and a pause at exactly the location Lily had indicated. The officers whispered among themselves, eyebrows raised. What they had previously accepted as incontrovertible evidence now seemed uncertain. Lily's instinctive observation had proven a critical flaw in their assumptions, and it demanded a fresh evaluation. The judge called a recess and instructed both sides to review the evidence with this new perspective. Attorneys huddled in corners, flipping through timelines, re-examining statements, and consulting digital maps of the neighborhood. The prosecution faced an unexpected challenge. They had built a case on circumstantial evidence that now required scrutiny, in light of the toddler's insight. Witnesses were contacted again for clarifications. Officers retraced the K-9's steps, and investigators noted each detail with renewed attention. Sarah and Tom watched Lily carefully, aware that the weight of her observation was unprecedented. She played quietly with a small notepad, stacking the edges like miniature blocks, unaware of the effect her words had unleashed. Her tiny voice repeated the phrase softly, "Not him," a mantra of truth, innocent yet undeniable. The couple exchanged glances, hearts pounding with anticipation and relief. The simplest observation, the quiet voice of a child, was now reshaping the trajectory of a legal case. Detectives began retracing the timeline of the burglary meticulously. They revisited the statements given by neighbors, analyzing each word with renewed attention. Discrepancies emerged, small but crucial. The shadow seen by a neighbor didn't match Mr. Jenkins' known movements. The sound of wheels on gravel aligned with a different location, and the piece of discarded clothing reported by witnesses no longer fit the original narrative. The dog's prior indications were reviewed against these facts, revealing gaps and inconsistencies previously ignored in the rush to judgment. In the courthouse, the defense attorney requested that a new examination of the canine findings be conducted immediately. The judge agreed, emphasizing the importance of fairness and accuracy. Officers guided the dog through the area again, carefully tracking scents and movements in relation to Lily's pinpointed observation. The dog reacted differently this time. A pause, a subtle shift, a clear indication that the original evidence had been misinterpreted. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as the implications became obvious. Adults were forced to reconcile months of work with the clarity of a 3-year-old's perception. The prosecution convened, their earlier confidence now tempered by caution. They reviewed every testimony, analyzing moments when witnesses had hesitated or offered vague statements. Small inconsistencies that were previously dismissed now carried significance. The timeline of events was adjusted. The path of the intruder reconsidered. Officers cross-referenced neighborhood cameras, confirming that the initial assumptions were flawed. Each discovery pointed toward a truth that Mr. Jenkins' defense had argued all along. He had been wrongly accused. Sarah held Lily close, whispering reassurances. "You're helping so much, baby," she said. Tom nodded, eyes wide with awe. "She sees things we can't. She's amazing." Lily looked up at them, a soft giggle escaping her lips, unaware that her curiosity and sharp observation had already shifted the course of the investigation. The family's relief mingled with a nervous anticipation. Justice now seemed possible, but only if adults recognized the significance of a child's insight. Across the courthouse, the detective team worked tirelessly, re-interviewing witnesses, checking alibis, and confirming timelines. A security camera captured footage that had initially been overlooked, a shadow moving at a different time than originally recorded. Tire tracks analyzed under a magnifying glass revealed an inconsistency in the initial report. Every detail converged toward one conclusion. The dog's initial indication had been misread, a timeline flawed, and Mr. Jenkins' supposed presence near the crime scene had been incorrectly assumed. Lily's words had sparked a chain reaction, forcing adults to reconsider every assumption. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, reporters scribbled furiously, their phones recording the unfolding story. Journalists recognized the significance of a toddler's insight. This was not just about one case, but about the reminder that perception and honesty can come from the most unexpected sources. Whispers spread among the public gallery, and neighbors craned forward, astonished by the realization that a child had influenced months of adult judgment with nothing but observation and instinct. As the day wore on, Mr. Jenkins' demeanor changed. Where anxiety had dominated, hope now flickered. He watched as officers reviewed evidence, rechecked reports, and hesitated over conclusions. The dog, once seen as an unerring guide to guilt, now served as a witness to the truth, guided by a tiny, unwavering observer. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of exoneration. By late afternoon, the investigators had reconstructed a timeline consistent with Lily's observations. New evidence aligned with her perception. The intruder's path, the movements of vehicles, and the dog's correct response. Even the most skeptical officers acknowledged the child's accuracy. The room buzzed with cautious optimism. Adults realized that months of training, investigation, and protocol had missed what a small, perceptive mind had noticed instinctively. The courtroom had shifted, thanks to two simple words: not him. Sarah and Tom, holding Lily's hand, felt the tension of weeks begin to dissolve. Their daughter had unknowingly played a critical role in correcting a miscarriage of justice. They marveled at the clarity and honesty of her perception, aware that this moment would remain etched in memory for years to come. Lily, oblivious to her impact, played quietly, stacking a small set of blocks, repeating fragments of adult words she had overheard. Not him. Not him. The judge, observing the proceedings, instructed that the revised evidence be formally recorded. Lawyers from both sides were attentive, re-examining strategies and testimonies in light of the child's observation. The prosecution conceded that some of their assumptions had been incorrect, and the defense prepared to present the corrected timeline. The K-9 officer, standing respectfully with the dog, nodded toward the judge, acknowledging that the toddler's observation had revealed a critical flaw in prior procedures. By evening, the courtroom had transformed. A case once dominated by suspicion and circumstantial evidence was now defined by renewed clarity. Investigators, lawyers, and officers had all been forced to reconsider long-held assumptions. Mr. Jenkins' innocence, previously uncertain, now stood on firmer ground. And at the center of it all was Lily, a 3-year-old whose perception, honesty, and courage had illuminated the truth in a way no adult had anticipated. As the courtroom emptied for the day, Sarah and Tom gathered Lily in their arms. Outside, the setting sun bathed the courthouse steps in golden light. They whispered to their daughter, praising her without revealing the full weight of her accomplishment. Lily giggled softly, blissfully unaware that her quiet observations and 2 simple words had sparked a transformation in the pursuit of justice. The neighborhood, meanwhile, began to buzz with whispers of the day's events. People marveled at the idea that a child could have influenced a legal case. Police officers reflected on the importance of humility, and lawyers recognized that clarity could come from the most unexpected sources. The town collectively recognized a truth that would linger long after the courthouse emptied. Innocence and honesty, when combined with observation, could challenge assumptions and reshape outcomes. And so, as the day ended, the stage was set for justice. The investigation had been reconsidered, evidence corrected, and assumptions challenged. Mr. Jenkins' fate, once precarious, now rested on a newfound clarity that only a child could have provided. Lily, oblivious to the storm she had created, simply held her parents' hands and smiled. 2 words, not him, had begun a ripple that would ultimately reach the courtroom, the town, and the hearts of all involved, proving the truth often comes from the smallest, most unexpected voices. The courtroom hummed with a nervous energy as the morning light slanted through the tall windows. Everyone sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding. Mr. Jenkins sat at the defense table. Fingers intertwined, jaw tight, yet a glimmer of hope had replaced the anxiety that had dominated him for weeks. The K-9 officer and his dog were at the front, alert, waiting for the next demonstration. And at the center of it all, 3-year-old Lily sat quietly, her small hand holding her mother's, her wide eyes observing every movement, every gesture, every glance. The judge cleared the courtroom, instructing the audience to remain seated but silent. He addressed both attorneys, emphasizing that the case must now be reconsidered in light of the child's observation. The prosecution, initially confident, now faced the undeniable truth that their assumptions were flawed. Every witness, every piece of circumstantial evidence was being re-examined. Even officers, trained and disciplined, acknowledged that Lily's insight had revealed gaps and inconsistencies in the original investigation. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by whispers of astonishment. Lily, oblivious to the weight of the moment, pointed again toward the dog. "Not him," she said clearly, her tiny voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. This simple declaration was no longer a curiosity. It was a pivot around which justice now rotated. Sarah held her daughter's hand tightly, whispering, "You're so brave, baby." "That's wonderful." Tom, eyes glistening, nodded silently. They understood, more than anyone else, that the truth was emerging because of her innocent perception. The K-9 officer guided the dog through the revised demonstration. With careful attention, the dog retraced the path associated with the burglary, now following the observation Lily had indicated. The results were undeniable. The scent trail, initially thought to implicate Mr. Jenkins, now pointed to a different route entirely. The dog's pauses and reactions confirmed the discrepancy in the original report. Every movement, every sniff, aligned with the details Lily had observed without bias, instinctively, hours earlier. The prosecution called its team of witnesses again, now under scrutiny. Statements that once seemed decisive now appeared contradictory. A neighbor's testimony about a shadow near a fence no longer matched Mr. Jenkins' alibi. A discarded coat initially considered insignificant now raised new questions. Every adult in the courtroom was forced to reevaluate months of investigation through the lens of a child's simple, honest observation. Murmurs spread through the gallery. People leaned forward, realizing that truth sometimes arrived in the smallest, most unexpected packages. Mr. Jenkins' defense attorney stepped forward, addressing the judge with a calm, deliberate voice. "Your Honor, the evidence, when reconsidered in light of the child's observation and the K-9's corrected behavior, no longer supports the initial accusations against my client. We respectfully request acknowledgement of the new findings and reconsideration of the charges." The judge, eyebrows raised, nodded thoughtfully. He had witnessed the transformation of a case that, moments ago, seemed settled, now unspooling before the clarity of a toddler's perspective. Lily's finger remained pointed at the dog. She swayed slightly, humming quietly to herself, unaware that her observation was reshaping the lives of everyone in the room. Even the dog seemed attentive, responding to the corrected cues as officers had demonstrated. Sarah and Tom exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the power of their daughter's perception. They had known she noticed things adults overlooked, but even they could not fully grasp the impact until now. Officers returned to their reports, meticulously re-examining every piece of evidence. Security footage was reviewed frame by frame. Tire tracks were reanalyzed, revealing an error in the initial timeline. Witness statements were cross-checked against new data. Every adult involved realized, with increasing awe, that a child's honest and unclouded observation had revealed truths that professional investigators had missed. Months of meticulous work had been corrected in minutes by a tiny, perceptive mind. The judge called for the final review. Attorneys presented the corrected K-9 findings, revised witness statements, and newly verified timelines. The courtroom was silent, all eyes on the defense table. Mr. Jenkins, pale but hopeful, glanced at Lily. He managed a small, almost disbelieving smile. The moment was surreal. A 3-year-old had, in effect, redirected the course of justice. His fate, once precarious, now hung in the balance of clarity and truth. Lily, in her innocence, had no concept of heroism. She adjusted a loose curl behind her ear, her small hand brushing against the papers scattered on the defense table. Sarah whispered softly, "You've helped more than you know, baby." Tom nodded, squeezing her hand gently. Outside the courtroom, sunlight glinted off the polished steps, illuminating the gravity of the moment. Inside, adults held their breath, watching as the truth began to emerge. The judge studied the revised evidence carefully. "It is clear," he said slowly, voice steady, "that the prior assumptions were incorrect. The observations provided by the child, combined with the re-evaluated K-9 evidence, establish a timeline inconsistent with Mr. Jenkins' involvement in this crime. A soft gasp passed through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, officers nodded with quiet respect, and Mr. Jenkins exhaled a long, trembling breath. For the first time in weeks, relief washed over him. "Thank you," he whispered quietly, almost to himself. His defense attorney gave him a reassuring nod. Even the prosecution, acknowledging the correction, displayed a mix of humility and astonishment. Months of preparation, evidence, and testimony had been overturned by the clarity of a small child's observation. Adults, trained and experienced, were now learning a profound lesson about perception, honesty, and the power of innocence. The courtroom murmurs settled into quiet awe as the judge continued. Given the corrected evidence, the charges against Mr. Jenkins will be dropped. He is hereby cleared of all accusations related to this case. A collective exhale swept through the room. Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes as she hugged Lily, whose small hands were unaware of the weight of the moment. Tom's voice shook with emotion. "You did it, baby. You helped." Lily simply giggled, focusing on a block she had been stacking, innocent of her extraordinary contribution. Officers approached Mr. Jenkins, shaking his hand, some quietly apologizing for the misunderstanding. The K-9 officer patted the dog, whose attention remained keen, as though acknowledging the role it had played in collaboration with the toddler. Mr. Jenkins approached the Andrews family, voice trembling, eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you." "Her," he said, nodding toward Lily. Sarah smiled, tears in her eyes. "She's just a child," she said softly. But sometimes children see things adults cannot. Outside the courtroom, the story spread quickly. Reporters captured images of Lily with her parents, Mr. Jenkins smiling in relief, and the K-9 team standing respectfully. News anchors marveled at the extraordinary events of the day, dubbing her the little girl who changed a case. The town buzzed with wonder, reflecting on how justice had been restored, not through experience alone, but through innocence, observation, and courage. Lily, unaware of her fame or significance, played quietly in her parents' arms. Sarah whispered, "You've made a difference." "Baby," Tom nodded, voice soft with awe. "The whole town will remember today because of you." The sun set behind the courthouse, casting golden light across the steps, symbolizing hope, truth, and the triumph of clarity. And so, the truth emerged. Mr. Jenkins, once wrongfully accused, regained his freedom and dignity. The neighborhood learned a powerful lesson about humility and observation. Law enforcement reflected on the importance of attention to detail and the value of perspective, no matter the source. And at the heart of it all was a 3-year-old girl, whose innocent observation had pierced through months of doubt and assumption, proving that justice often comes from the most unexpected voices. The day ended with a quiet celebration. Mr. Jenkins returned home, grateful and humbled. The Andrews family walked back to their house, Lily skipping lightly beside them, blissfully unaware that her words, too small, simple words, had changed the course of lives, law, and community perception. In a world often clouded by assumption, she had illuminated the path of truth. The courthouse had emptied, leaving an almost reverent silence in its wake. The polished wood floors gleamed under the fading light, and the high windows cast long shadows across the walls. For weeks, the courtroom had been a stage for tension, doubt, and scrutiny. Now, it seemed almost transformed, softened by the weight of truth. Mr. Jenkins had been exonerated, and the ripple of relief, humility, and astonishment hung in the air like a tangible presence. Outside, the town seemed quieter, almost contemplative. Residents who had once whispered behind curtains now spoke in hushed tones of amazement. A 3-year-old girl, who had toddled through the courtroom barely noticed by most, had altered the course of justice with her innocent observation. Parents paused on the sidewalks, sharing stories of the extraordinary events, while children played unaware, yet inspired by the quiet courage of someone their age. The day's events had left a profound mark, a lesson in perception, honesty, and the unexpected power of clarity. The Andrews family walked home slowly, holding Lily's small hand between them. Sarah's heart still raced from the courtroom drama, her mind replaying each moment Lily had spoken those words. Not him. It had been simple, unassuming, yet it had carried the weight of truth. Tom glanced at his daughter, marveling at the unfiltered perspective she had brought to a situation fraught with assumption and tension. "I still can't believe it," he said softly. "She really did see it." "Exactly right." Lily, oblivious to the enormity of her contribution, hummed quietly, picking up a fallen leaf along the sidewalk and examining it carefully. Her small fingers traced the veins of the leaf, her mind focused on a new puzzle. Sarah smiled, realizing that while Lily's actions had changed lives, her understanding of the event remained innocent and pure. The family had witnessed something extraordinary, a child's perception, honest and unbiased, could illuminate a path no adult had seen dot at the Jenkins home. The atmosphere had transformed from weeks of fear and then frustration to cautious celebration. Mr. Jenkins hugged his family tightly, the weight of wrongful accusation lifting from his shoulders. Tears of relief glistened in his eyes as he reflected on how narrowly he had escaped injustice. "I don't know how to thank her enough," he murmured to the Andrews family when they visited later that afternoon. "She saved me in a way I never imagined possible." Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance. "She's just a child," Sarah said softly. "But sometimes the smallest voices carry the clearest truths." Tom nodded. And today, she reminded all of us that observation, honesty, and courage aren't measured by age. They're measured by attention and heart. The room was quiet, except for Lily's laughter as she played with a small toy dog. Her mind still engaging with the world in her own innocent way. The local news began reporting on the extraordinary events, highlighting the role of the 3-year-old girl, whose observation had corrected months of assumption. Headlines read, "Toddler's words clear man of wrongful accusation," and "Tiny witness. Big impact. How innocence revealed the truth." Neighbors marveled at the story, and social media buzzed with awe, admiration, and reflection. Many shared experiences of children noticing details adults had overlooked. Inspired by Lily's instinctive clarity. At the police department, officers reflected on the investigation with newfound humility. Months of careful work, protocols, and procedures had been crucial, yet they had overlooked the simplest evidence: a child's observation. The canine officer patted his dog, now understanding the depth of the lesson. Even trained professionals could learn from innocence, clarity, and perspective. The department held internal discussions on how to approach future cases, recognizing that sometimes the most critical insights could come from the least expected sources. For Mr. Jenkins, life began to return to normal, yet he remained acutely aware of how close he had come to a permanent injustice. The experience reshaped his perspective on trust, assumption, and human observation. He shared his gratitude widely, ensuring that the community understood the role the Andrews family, and especially Lily, had played in restoring his freedom. Meetings with neighbors, small gatherings, and conversations at local coffee shops became opportunities to reflect, appreciate, and celebrate the power of truth when combined with courage. No matter how young the messenger, the Andrews family, too, reflected deeply on the experience. Sarah and Tom realized that parenting had revealed an unexpected truth. The intuition and perception of a child could be profoundly insightful. Lily, in her innocence, had observed with precision, noted details adults overlooked, and voiced a simple truth that transformed lives. The family embraced the lesson with humility and pride, understanding that supporting observation, encouraging honesty, and valuing perspective could make extraordinary differences in the world around them. Even the town's children felt the ripple. Local schools discussed the story, teachers highlighting the value of careful observation, honesty, and courage. Students shared experiences of noticing small things, understanding the significance of paying attention, and appreciating truthfulness. Parents spoke to their children about the power of observation and integrity, using Lily as an example of how even the smallest voices can hold the greatest truths. Lily herself, blissfully unaware of her role in the courtroom drama, continued to explore the world with curiosity and wonder. Leaves, stones, shadows, and sounds captivated her mind, each a puzzle to examine. Yet her tiny voice, which had now changed a man's life, remained sweetly innocent, unassuming, and natural. The world had witnessed the extraordinary through the lens of a child, and the impact would linger in the memories of those involved forever. Mr. Jenkins, seated in his living room with his family, reflected on the strange and miraculous series of events. "It's incredible," he said softly, "that someone so young could see so clearly what adults could not. Her clarity gave me my life back." His children listened intently, absorbing the lesson that justice, truth, and perspective sometimes emerge from unexpected places. Across the town, similar reflections took root, creating a renewed appreciation for honesty, careful observation, and the subtle insights of those often underestimated. By evening, the community gathered for a small celebration at a local park, bringing flowers, smiles, and congratulations. Neighbors hugged, exchanged stories, and reflected on the extraordinary events. Lily ran among the trees, laughing and pointing at squirrels, entirely unaware that her tiny hands and sharp eyes had altered the course of justice. Sarah and Tom watched, hearts full, recognizing that the day's impact extended far beyond the courtroom. It had inspired a town, reminded adults to pay attention, and honored the value of a child's perspective. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Mr. Jenkins approached Lily, kneeling to her level. "Thank you, little one," he said softly. "You saw what no one else could." Lily blinked up at him, giggling and pointing at a squirrel, oblivious to the weight of his words. Yet those words carried the gravity of gratitude, humility, and the recognition that sometimes the purest insight comes from innocence. The town, the courthouse, and the Andrews family carried the lesson forward. Clarity, courage, and honesty are not defined by age. They are defined by observation, integrity, and the willingness to speak truth, even in the simplest words. Lily, who had pointed at the police dog and said 2 words, "Not him," had altered a life, a case, and a community's understanding of justice. And though she remained unaware of her fame, her impact was undeniable. The evening ended with a soft hum of gratitude, reflection, and wonder. Adults reflected on humility, children reflected on the power of observation, and families reflected on the extraordinary influence one innocent voice could have. The Andrews family walked home slowly, holding Lily's hands, hearts full, minds buzzing with awe and relief. In the quiet, they whispered together, "Sometimes the truth needs only a clear eye and an honest heart." No matter how small the observer may be, and as the stars appeared above, twinkling softly over the quiet town, the world seemed a little brighter, a little fairer, and infinitely more hopeful, because a child had spoken. A dog had waited, and justice had been seen clearly through innocent eyes. The courthouse steps were quiet now, bathed in the soft morning light. The frenzy of the trial had passed, replaced by a calm sense of closure. Mr. Jenkins had returned home, fully exonerated, and the community slowly began to process the extraordinary events that had unfolded. A 3-year-old girl, who had wandered into a courtroom almost unnoticed, had spoken 2 simple words, "Not him," and altered the trajectory of justice. Those words lingered in the minds of everyone present, a reminder that clarity and truth can come from the most unexpected sources. Sarah and Tom Andrews walked with Lily through the small park near their home. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and the gentle rustle of leaves seemed almost celebratory. Lily toddled ahead, pointing at a squirrel and chattering excitedly. Her parents followed closely, hearts still full of awe and relief. The events of the past days had left them exhausted, yet profoundly grateful. Their daughter had shown a remarkable perception, courage, and honesty, qualities that had reshaped a man's life and reminded the town of the importance of seeing clearly without assumption. Inside the Jenkins household, life had begun to return to a cautious normal. Mr. Jenkins, though relieved, remained reflective. The experience had been a profound lesson in humility and patience. For weeks, he had feared losing his freedom and reputation. Now, thanks to a child's unfiltered observation, he had regained both. He spent long moments with his family, talking quietly about what had happened, expressing gratitude not only to the Andrews family, but to everyone who had revisited the evidence with integrity. He understood how fragile justice can be, and how important it is to remain open to unexpected truths. The police department also experienced a subtle but powerful shift. Officers reflected on their procedures, realizing that even the most rigorous training and experience can be complemented by perspective from outside their ranks. The K-9 unit had been critical, yet even it had required the insight of an innocent observer to reveal the true sequence of events. Detectives held meetings to discuss new strategies, emphasizing attention to detail, humility, and the value of diverse viewpoints. In every discussion, the example of Lily's observation was cited as a reminder. Truth is sometimes seen most clearly through the eyes of those who are unburdened by expectation. News outlets continued to cover the story, highlighting the extraordinary role of a child in the courtroom. Headlines celebrated Lily as the little witness who saw the truth, and toddler's words clear innocent man. The town buzzed with discussion, parents praising the story as a lesson for children and adults alike. Social media lit up with admiration, debates, and reflections on the remarkable outcome. Many shared personal anecdotes of moments when children had noticed details adults had overlooked, reinforcing the lesson that wisdom and insight are not confined to age or authority. Community members began visiting the Jenkins home to offer congratulations and support. Neighbors expressed relief and amazement, sharing their own observations of Lily during the trial. Her tiny presence had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that clarity can arise unexpectedly, and that the smallest voices can wield profound influence. Mr. Jenkins, humble and grateful, welcomed each visitor with warmth, emphasizing that the real hero was a child whose honesty and observation had guided everyone toward truth. For the Andrews family, life took on a reflective, almost sacred rhythm. Sarah and Tom marveled at how Lily, in her innocence, had played a pivotal role in justice. They encouraged her curiosity and attentiveness, knowing that these traits had been instrumental in uncovering the truth. They also took time to teach her about kindness, humility, and responsibility, realizing that her abilities were remarkable, but that nurturing her character would be equally important. Lily, blissfully unaware of the fame she had earned, simply explored the world around her with wonder, laughter, and curiosity. In schools across the town, teachers shared the story as an inspiring lesson in observation and honesty. Children learned that paying attention, noticing details, and speaking truthfully can have real impact. Parents discussed the importance of encouraging curiosity, listening to children, and valuing their perspectives. The story became more than a legal anomaly. It became a cultural touchstone, reinforcing the idea that wisdom can emerge from unexpected sources, and that even the youngest minds can influence the course of events in profound ways. The Jenkins family, fully restored, embraced the future with a renewed sense of possibility. They returned to their routines, yet the experience had left a lasting imprint. They had seen fear, frustration, and uncertainty transform into relief, hope, and gratitude. They understood how fragile justice can be, and how vigilance, honesty, and attention can prevent mistakes. In quiet moments, Mr. Jenkins would recall Lily's simple words and feel the depth of their significance. 2 small words that carried the weight of truth and restored a life. Sarah and Tom reflected on the trial and its aftermath, understanding that parenting sometimes involves witnessing extraordinary courage in ordinary moments. Lily had demonstrated intuition, focus, and honesty traits that had changed lives. They felt immense pride, not just in her intelligence, but in her pure-hearted integrity. They also recognized the importance of nurturing those qualities, allowing their daughter's innate sense of perception and fairness to grow alongside her love for exploration and play. As weeks turned into months, the community embraced the story as part of its collective memory. People spoke of the case with respect, awe, and a touch of wonder. Mr. Jenkins' exoneration became a symbol of justice corrected, while Lily's role illustrated the unexpected power of observation and innocence. The K-9 unit continued its work, now guided by the lessons learned from the trial: humility, attention, and openness to insights beyond the expected. Children in the town grew up inspired by the story, believing in the value of honesty and attentiveness, regardless of age. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and lavender, Sarah and Tom tucked Lily into bed. She yawned, eyes heavy but sparkling with curiosity. "You did a big thing today, Lily," Sarah whispered softly, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. Lily smiled sleepily, murmuring about a squirrel she had seen in the yard, oblivious to the gravity of her actions. Tom kissed her cheek, whispering, "The world is better because of you, baby. Never stop noticing, never stop speaking truth." The stars twinkled above the quiet town, mirroring the sense of hope, integrity, and possibility that now permeated the lives of those involved. Mr. Jenkins had regained his freedom, his dignity restored, and the town had been reminded of the power of honesty and careful observation. The Andrews family, humbled and inspired, carried forward a newfound understanding. Even the smallest voices, when guided by clarity and courage, can illuminate truth, inspire change, and transform the lives of many. And so, the story concluded not with fanfare or ceremony, but with quiet gratitude, reflection, and a lasting lesson. A child's innocent words, not him, had undone months of uncertainty and fear, proving that perception, honesty, and courage are not measured by age. The courtroom drama became a tale of humanity's capacity for insight, humility, and openness to truth. Lily's observation became a permanent reminder. Sometimes, the smallest voices echo the loudest, and the simplest words can change the world. The town slept peacefully that night, the courthouse steps empty, the K-9 team resting, and the families quietly reflecting. But the impact of a child's honesty, courage, and perception lingered in every heart. It was a story that would be retold, remembered, and cherished for years, a testament to the extraordinary power of clarity, innocence, and truth. In the end, justice had prevailed, lives had been restored, and a community had learned a lesson it would never forget.